Somewhere in a library, or collecting dust on a professor's shelf, there is a book that explains your life better than most things you were ever taught in school. It was published in 1971. It is 340 pages, and it contains one idea, one single, documented, precisely argued idea, that the people who run the systems you live inside have spent decades hoping you would never fully understand. The book is called Blaming the Victim. The author is William Ryan, psychologist, civil rights activist, and one of the most dangerously clear thinkers of the 20th century. What Ryan did, over the course of this book, was name a process, not a conspiracy, not a villain, a process, automatic, repeatable, carried out mostly by people who believe they are helping. He called it the art of savage discovery, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. So, let us open the book. Ryan opens Blaming the Victim with a question almost nobody thinks to ask. When a society produces poverty, real poverty, systemic poverty, the kind that passes from parent to child like an inheritance nobody chose, who gets studied? Not the corporations holding wages down, not the governments defunding the schools, not the landlords letting the buildings rot. The people at the bottom get studied. The moment you send in the researchers, the sociologists, the psychologists, the public health experts, the development consultants, something happens that feels like science but functions like ideology. They find that the poor are different. Different in how they speak, different in how they spend, different in how they structure their families, express their ambitions, manage their time. All of it measurably, documentably different from the middle-class researchers doing the measuring. And then, step 3, those differences become the explanation. They are poor because of how they are. Their children fail because of what they value. Their communities suffer because of what they do. Ryan calls this, in his exact words, a brilliant ideology for justifying a perverse form of social action designed to change, not society, as one might expect, but rather society's victim. 4 steps. And notice, at no point does anyone need to be dishonest. At no point does anyone need to be malicious. The researcher genuinely wants to understand poverty. The social worker genuinely wants to help. The policymaker genuinely wants to improve outcomes. Ryan is not writing about cynics. He is writing about something far more difficult to fight than cynicism. He is writing about what he calls a brilliant compromise, a way of caring about suffering without threatening the conditions that produce it. The system is protected, the victim is blamed, and the person doing the blaming goes home feeling like they have done something good. That, Ryan argues, is the genius of this ideology, and that is precisely why it has been so hard to dislodge. To understand why this ideology keeps winning, Ryan is specific about why it keeps winning over, as he writes, the best people. You need to understand the social position of the person who delivers it. Ryan draws this person carefully, with empathy, not contempt. This person is educated, professionally established. They own, or are close to owning, a home. The system has, broadly speaking, been good to them, but they are also genuinely troubled by inequality. They look at suffering and feel something real. Ryan writes that this person is acutely aware of poverty, racial discrimination, exploitation, and deprivation, and that concern for the suffering of others is central to his value system. Now, here is the bind. Pay close attention, because this is the mechanism. A real structural solution to poverty would directly threaten this person's position. Ryan is precise. He does not deal in vague generalities. He names it. If the children of the poor received truly equal education, they would compete, on merit, with middle-class children for university places. Ryan names, in the book, Harvard, Columbia, and Antioch. A genuinely equitable distribution of income would mean, in Ryan's exact words, a smaller or older house, with fewer ewes or no rhododendrons in the yard. So this person cannot attack the system that has rewarded them, but they cannot stand aside from suffering either. So they do what Ryan calls, with dark precision, a brilliant compromise. They redirect all their intellectual energy, all their genuine compassion, toward the victim. They study the victim's deficiencies. They design programs for the victim to adapt better within the system. All of it with care, with credentials, with scientific language. Ryan writes that this person is, in the words of an old Yiddish proverb, trying to dance at two weddings. Old friends with both brides. Unable to choose. Ryan describes the action in the book precisely. They want to bind up wounds, inject penicillin, administer morphine, and evacuate the wounded for rehabilitation, while the machine that produces the wounds keeps running, quietly, just out of frame. And this ideology, Ryan insists, is not worked out in a logical, rational, conscious way. It does not require deception. It requires only a structural position, comfortable enough to not need to change the system, and compassionate enough to need to feel like you are trying. Ryan's book documents, methodically, with research, how this ideology operates across three of the most persistent accusations made against the poor. Let us take them one at a time. 1. The poor do not value education. Ryan cites a study in which upper-class and poor parents were asked one identical question. Do you want your child to go to university? 91% of upper-class parents said yes. 68% of poor parents said yes. The conclusion drawn by the researchers: the poor do not value education. Ryan reads that conclusion and stops. 68% of poor parents, people navigating financial precarity, often working multiple jobs, often in unstable housing, were still carrying this aspiration. Ryan calls that, in his exact words, in a very real sense, remarkable. Then he turns the lens in the direction nobody thought to look. Why did 1 in 10 upper-class parents not want their child at university? They had every structural advantage, every resource, every connection. Ryan's answer: they could afford not to care. Their children would inherit security regardless. But the poor parent who said yes, knowing exactly what stood between that wish and reality, was expressing something Ryan argues should command respect, not study. And for the 1/3 who said no, Ryan does not diagnose them. He draws on the work of sociologist Hyman Rodman, quoted directly in the book, to explain. Lower-class persons in close interaction with each other and faced with similar problems do not long remain in a state of mutual ignorance. They do not maintain a strong commitment to middle-class values that they cannot attain. A change takes place. They come to tolerate and eventually to evaluate favorably certain deviations from middle-class values. In this way, they need not be continually frustrated by their failure to live up to unattainable values. Ryan's conclusion from Rodman's framework: these differences occur primarily as an adaptive rather than as a deviant response. Same intelligence, same core desire, different structural reality, different rational expression of the same human hope. 2. The poor cannot defer gratification. They spend instead of saving. Researchers developed what they called the non-deferred gratification pattern. The theory: middle-class people plan for the future. The poor cannot. They are, in the language Ryan quotes from these researchers, oriented toward the present rather than the future. Ryan's response is calm and final. Is it rational to save when you are one medical bill away from losing your home? Is it rational to invest long-term when the electricity may not be connected next month? When a middle-class person saves, they make the rational choice for their structural situation. When a poor person spends their available money on immediate needs, food, medicine, transport, school fees, they are also making the rational choice for their structural situation. The behavior is different. The intelligence is identical. The circumstances are what differ. What social scientists label a cultural trait is, Ryan demonstrates, a situational adaptation. Change the structure, and the behavior changes with it. 3. The poor are lazy. Ryan traces the word idleness, the ancestor of laziness, through history with a pointed observation. In Elizabethan England, the poor were classified under the legal category of idleness. Centuries later, the Macone Commission, convened in 1966 to investigate the Watts uprising in Los Angeles, still cited both unemployment and idleness as causes of the disorder. Ryan notes with dry precision that in the near future, if the then prophets of automation proved right, the label unemployment would fade again and idleness, now renamed the leisure time problem, would raise its head once more. He was right. It is 2026. And the person being called lazy is the same person who was up at 5, on 2 buses by 8, and still helping with homework at 10. The label changes. The ideology does not. Ryan opens blaming the victim with a case study that should be taught in every school of government, every public health faculty, every training program for social workers in the world. It concerns lead paint and a dead child. And who got blamed? In American cities, poor families lived in tenement housing owned by private landlords. The paint on the walls contained lead. Small children, as small children do, touched the walls, put their hands to their mouths, ate the peeling chips. Lead poisoning, brain damage, in documented cases, death. The response? Ryan writes that a major pharmaceutical manufacturer, as an act of humanitarian concern, has distributed copies of a large poster, featuring a photograph of a charming little girl, warning that lead paint can kill. The City Health Department's coloring book, Ryan documents, labels as neglectful and thoughtless the mother who does not keep her infant under constant surveillance to prevent paint eating. Neglectful, thoughtless, the mother. Not the landlord, not the enforcement body, not the city, the mother. Ryan investigated the documented facts in New Haven, Connecticut. He found that in several buildings, children had been poisoned not once, but repeatedly through successive tenants. One family poisoned and gone, another moved in. Same wall, same paint. Same landlord who never repaired it. Ryan states the legal facts plainly. To use lead paint in a residence is illegal. To permit lead paint to be exposed in a residence is illegal. The housing code, he notes, does provide for criminal penalties. The landlord was a criminal, repeatedly, knowingly, while children died. The city enforcement agency did nothing. Ryan's conclusion, and it is a legal conclusion, not a rhetorical one. The general problem of lead poisoning is more accurately analyzed as the result of a systematic program of law-breaking by one interest group in the community, with the toleration and encouragement of the public authority charged with enforcing that law. And then, the sentence that should not be possible to read without stopping. To load a burden of guilt on the mother of a dead or dangerously ill child is an egregious distortion of reality. And to do so under the guise of public-spirited and humanitarian service to the community is intolerable. This is Ryan's central concept, exceptionalism versus universalism, made human. Exceptionalist thinking asks, what is wrong with these people? It produces posters, coloring books, and the word neglectful applied to a grieving mother. Universalist thinking asks, who is breaking the law? And who is protecting them? It produces prosecution of the landlord, enforcement of the housing code, and children who live. One path produces a poster on a wall. The other produces accountability. And every person in power who chose the first path did so because the second path leads directly toward the people who fund them. Of all the groups targeted by savage discovery, all the communities studied, labeled, and blamed, single mothers, and specifically poor black single mothers, have faced the most sustained and politically weaponized campaign of blame in modern history. Ryan traces exactly how it was built. The architecture is worth understanding. It began in academic seminar rooms. Ryan documents that liberal social scientists and welfare professionals had been, in his words, gossiping for years about the lives of poor girls and Negro girls, sharing at conferences hard-won confidences about their promiscuity, how their sexual values are different, and about deviant values and behavior patterns. This academic language moved into government. In 1965, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, United States Assistant Secretary of Labor, published what became known as the Moynihan Report. Ryan quotes the central claim: "At the heart of the deterioration of the fabric of Negro society is the deterioration of the Negro family. It is the fundamental source of weakness of the Negro community at the present time. Not structural racism, not legal exclusion from employment, not the systematic dismantling of black economic life across generations. The family, the woman at its center." Ryan shows what was structurally occurring. The deliberate exclusion of black men from formal employment made the breadwinner role economically impossible for many. Women held families together because circumstances demanded it. What academics called matriarchy was survival, women doing what economic exclusion had made necessary. The strength of these women was reframed as the pathology causing black inequality. Then, the moment Ryan identifies as most revealing, the same social scientists were, in his words, appalled and indignant and outraged when politicians used their language directly. Senator Russell Long described welfare mothers on the floor of the United States Senate as brood mares. The academics protested. Ryan's response is the most precise in the book. The conventional wisdom held in professional and academic circles, he writes, is not all that different from the ideology that produced the cruel and insulting 1967 amendments. They built the weapon. They simply expressed surprise when someone fired it. In 2026, the language updates. The accent shifts. The channel changes. But the argument, the woman at the bottom of a system that failed her, made responsible for the failure, has not moved. Ryan's book is not, ultimately, a book about the ruling class. The ruling class has always known what it is doing. Ryan's book is about the middle class, because the middle class is the hinge. The ruling class, those who own the most, who profit most from the current arrangement, are relatively few. They cannot maintain the system through ownership alone. They need people to run it. Teachers, doctors, social workers, economists, journalists, policy analysts, researchers, administrators. That is the middle class. And the middle class holds a structural position that is historically unique, close enough to the poor to see their suffering, and sufficiently removed from it not to share it. Ryan's argument is that the most consequential shift available in any society is the middle class choosing, not from guilt, but from intellectual honesty, to correctly diagnose the problems they encounter every professional day. Not, what is wrong with this family, but, what produced this outcome? What decisions, by whom, created these conditions? And who benefits from those conditions remaining unchanged? The moment a teacher stops recording that a child lacks cultural preparation and starts documenting that her school is funded at a fraction of the rate of a school 5 miles away, she becomes a different kind of professional. The moment a health practitioner stops prescribing wellness apps and lifestyle management to patients whose bodies are breaking under the weight of poverty and overwork, and starts documenting how precarious housing, food insecurity, and stagnant wages are the true architects of their depression, she becomes a different kind of healer. The moment a social worker stops filing reports about a family's behavioral deficits and starts giving evidence about how housing costs and wage levels produce the outcomes she sees every week, she becomes a different kind of witness. The moment a development economist stops writing clinical reports about governance failures in debt-trapped countries and starts calling out the blatant corruption and excesses of government officials, exposing how structural adjustment agreements prioritize foreign creditors over the survival of the people, he stops being an analyst and starts being a witness to the truth. The system does not need the middle class to be cruel. It only needs them to keep studying the victim, and to keep calling that study help. William Ryan ended blaming the victim with these words. They were written in 1971. Read them, and ask yourself, honestly, whether anything has changed. That is the ideology of blaming the victim, the cunning art of savage discovery. The tragic, frightening truth is that it is a mythology that is winning over the best people of our time, the very people who must resist this ideological temptation if we are to achieve non-violent change. The best people, not the most corrupt, not the most cynical, not the most powerful. The best people, educated, compassionate, professionally engaged, who every day, in their classrooms and clinics and consulting rooms and research papers, are recruited to look at the victim, when the evidence has always pointed past the victim. The question this book puts to every one of us is not whether we are good. The question is whether our goodness, our education, our compassion, our professional expertise, is being used to protect something that must change. Blaming the Victim, by William Ryan. Published 1971. Still describing 2026 with precision that should trouble all of us. Read it. Share this video. And the next time someone tells you the poor are poor because of something wrong with them, know enough to ask, by what evidence? And who benefits from that explanation being true? That question, that specific, unapologetic, evidence-demanding question, is where real thinking begins. Organize. Resist. Be unbreakable.